So to start with, I think that this video is more of an appeal to people like me that don't necessarily possess a lot of artistic talent, but still like to make stuff nonetheless. So what I've got here is a thin piece of copper, just kind of a leftover scrap. I need to make some type of a pull or a little knob that I can put on the lid of a keepsake box that I'm making for somebody. And I thought, the copper does have kind of a cool look, and you can make believe that you're a blacksmith when you're working with this stuff. I mean, technically it is metal, right? So really easy to work with, and I'm going to show you just a few steps that I go through when I'm making the feather. The first thing I do is I put a torch on that copper. I just watch the color change. As soon as I see kind of that rainbow going throughout the whole thing, I'll drop it in that water, cool it off really fast. Heating that up real hot and then cooling it down real fast makes it so this copper is super easy to work with your bare hands. Now you can tell that copper is not super thick to begin with, but heating it up and cooling it like that, just with your bare hands, you can fold that just about in the middle without a whole lot of trouble. With it bent in half like that, or roughly in half, I'll just use this small ball peen hammer to hammer down this ridge. Because I'm making a feather, I do want that to be pretty tight. Now, without heating it up and cooling it down again, I just like to take a chisel like this to open this back up. If you don't open it enough and you start to hammer on it to flatten it, sometimes that bend right here will fold over on itself, and then it makes it really tough to get it open. And now we're just going to fold that open. So once we have that unpinched there at the bottom, we'll just lay that flat. Slowly start to work that down. See how it makes that cool ridge right down the middle? There's all sorts of stuff you can do with this. And you'll notice that as you're hammering on that, sometimes that'll start to walk or curve a little bit, and that actually ends up looking pretty cool. But now, in a very non-artistic way, I need to trace a feather onto that or just scribe one out. And since I don't have a stencil, I think that's what I'm going to do. So that's a rough shape of my feather, and it doesn't have to be really anywhere close to what the end one is going to look like. If you've got a template or a stencil or something you can use, put it on the back side of there, makes it really easy. I don't have one in the garage tonight, so I just used a pencil and trace that on there. Now we're going to cut it out. Might look more like a leaf than a feather right now, but that's okay. At this stage in the design is when I start to get worried about the realistic looking feather association sending me lots of hate mail. I know that's kind of just a rough idea of what a feather would look like, but we're going to start moving towards the texturing just the same. So what you can use to, make those striations in the feather as it comes down, you can either use a chisel like this that has a very sharp pronounced line, or you can use the back side of one of these, I think it's a Pickard hammer or something like that, but that type of end. Now that looks like it's just barely rounded over, but where it's contacting is a pretty narrow point. So we're going to show you what that looks like after we heat this up and cool it down one more time. And now that we've done that, that copper is nice and soft. So we're going to start putting that texture in. The only thing you have to be kind of careful about is how close you get to that spine, but it's not a huge deal, so don't worry about having to be too careful. So just after a few seconds of hammering on that, you can see that that texture really starts to set in there. The hard part is getting those to come right up against that ridge right there, but we're going to work on that for a second. Now you can see how from that side profile it starts to walk a little bit, and that is not a big deal. One thing I've found is super nice to have around is just a wooden mallet like that. It doesn't mar up the copper as much. Get that guy flat again and do a little bit more of the texturing. Alrighty, so just done some rough shaping, cut out a few notches there. See how that's starting to look kind of like a feather. I mean, you could reasonably believe that that was supposed to be a feather. What I need to do now is some file work along these edges where their shears go through a lot of times. I don't know if you can see that, but it leaves that dimpling along there. So we're going to try to file out some of that. If not, no worries. And then we'll clean up the spine as it goes down there. So I just went through with a couple of files. Most of them are just from Harbor Freight, those really teeny tiny files. And get into some of these nooks and crannies. And don't be afraid to bend up one part so you can file down one side and then smash it down flat. And you can see how that's kind of taking a little bit of curve on there. I like that. Now we're going to shine that guy up with just a Dremel with a brass wire wheel on there. And that's going to look a little something like this. Bingo bango. Just a real shiny patina. I'm not sure how to hold that in the camera. That's what it did look like. And then shined up. And don't worry about getting too crazy with any kind of a wire wheel. Sometimes if you leave, that kind of that burnished look in those low spots, it can actually look pretty cool. Or with copper, there's a lot of different patinas you can put on there. But now I'm going to try to shape this into something I can use as just a little bit of a lift for a lid. And in the end, I have kind of a contour like that. It'll get mounted to the lid, and they'll just lift it up right there. So I'm going to probably go back and put a little bit more texture in here, and you can see how I've kind of rolled some of those edges over on themselves. There's just a million different things that you can do on this, but very easy, a lot of fun. I think once you start doing this kind of stuff, you're going to find there's a million different ways to go with this. Again, very basic. Love to hear your thoughts. If you've got any recommendations of other channels that do stuff like this, it would be easy as well. But thanks for watching.